Okay, tonight, we're stepping into a quiet street where the echoes of a life abruptly ended still linger. A bullet, a green bicycle, and a life ended without reason, a mystery that still chills decades later. Imagine the subtle tremor of a small town disturbed, the invisible threads of fear weaving through ordinary homes. Silent yet unrelenting. Welcome to Criminal Mindcast, the podcast where we tell true crime stories, not just with facts, but with silence, with the haunting weight of what was never said. Here we explore not only what happened, but why it might have happened, examining the unseen fractures in human nature, the spaces between decisions, and the dark reflections we often refuse to acknowledge. Tonight, we turn our attention to a case that has perplexed investigators and haunted communities for generations. A murder without motive, a life interrupted, and a green bicycle left as an eerie testament to an unresolved past. This is not a story of sensationalized horror. It is a study in absence, in the gaps that reason cannot easily fill, and in the questions that remain suspended in silence. The victim at the center of this case was a young adult whose life at first glance seemed unremarkable. Yet beneath the surface lay subtle complexities that only emerge under the lens of tragedy. Raised in a small town, they moved among familiar faces, yet layers of quiet tension and unspoken stress quietly influenced daily life. Family relationships appeared stable, but were emotionally distant, filled with implicit expectations and latent pressures that subtly shaped personality, decision-making, and behavior over time. Friends remembered the victim as thoughtful and occasionally withdrawn, attentive to minute details, and consistently cautious in both thought and action. This reflective and observant nature, while admirable, also created psychological vulnerability. For a mind so attuned to patterns, notices disruptions and inconsistencies that others might ignore. Their occupation, modest but respectable, provided structure and rhythm to daily life, masking an internal restlessness that few colleagues or acquaintances detected. Mornings and evenings followed familiar routines, yet beneath the surface, the victim's mind remained sensitive to nuance, constantly monitoring environments and social interactions. Outside of work, they gravitated towards solitary pursuits, long, unhurried walks through quiet streets, afternoons absorbed in reading, and careful observation of everyday life's subtle textures. These habits reveal a consciousness capable of deep empathy, introspection, and insight, yet equally susceptible to internalized stress, social anxieties, and the cumulative pressures of maintaining personal order. The emerging psychological profile depicts a person dependent on routine, structure, and predictability, cautious by nature, unlikely to provoke conflict, and even less likely to place themselves in harm's way intentionally, rendering the ensuing violence all the more perplexing. The small town in which they lived shaped this psychological landscape. In a community where everyone's history was known and reputations silently monitored, social scrutiny imposed subtle behavioral constraints. Secrets, though rarely spoken aloud, and unspoken hierarchies created an invisible pressure, magnifying even minor deviations. Within this environment, ordinary routines coexisted with latent tension, a delicate equilibrium that could be shattered by a single, unforeseen intrusion. In terms of vulnerabilities, the victim demonstrated no signs of recklessness or significant risk-taking. Daily movements were predictable, interactions cautious, and relationships carefully navigated. Yet subtle social stresses, minor past conflicts, whispers of gossip, and unresolved familial tension created a psychological substrate in which even minimal intrusion could have profound effects. The contrast between a controlled, cautious demeanor and the violence that ended this life underscores a chilling truth. Small-town murders, though statistically rare, are entirely possible when hidden fractures in personal, social, and environmental structures converge. It is critical to consider not only the personal characteristics of the victim, but also the broader environmental factors that shaped their existence. The town's quiet streets, familiar faces, and cyclical routines fostered an illusion of safety. Yet beneath this apparent stability lay subtle resentments, minor grievances, and the latent potential for human malevolence. These undercurrents, invisible to the casual observer, formed a landscape in which tragedy could unfold silently without warning and with devastating effect. The life of the victim, meticulously managed and seemingly ordinary, existed within a delicate equilibrium susceptible to even minor disruptions. From a psychological perspective, the victim was an individual oriented toward order, empathy, and introspection. They were unlikely to provoke aggression intentionally, making the eventual violence appear both arbitrary and incomprehensible. The perpetrator, entering this structured world, breached a carefully maintained order, exploiting vulnerabilities invisible to outsiders. Understanding the victim's disposition is essential to understanding the narrative of the crime. It was not an act of random chaos, but the collision of hidden shadows with an unsuspecting reality. Every detail of daily routine, every pattern of behavior, becomes significant when contrasted with the abruptness of the attack. Family dynamics further complicated the backdrop. Although outwardly conventional, subtle patterns of unresolved trauma, minor secrets, and inherited stress quietly permeated domestic life. Childhood interactions, parental expectations, and unspoken family tensions contributed meaningfully to the psychological architecture of both the victim and the social environment surrounding them. These latent dynamics did not directly cause the murder, but they created conditions in which the victim's internal and external vulnerabilities were subtly amplified. Even ordinary life, in such a context, contains fissures that can be exploited by forces external to the individual. The green bicycle, later found near the scene, is more than a simple object. It symbolizes suspended normalcy and the abrupt intrusion of chaos into an otherwise orderly life. Representing routine, independence, and innocence, the bicycle bears silent witness to the disruption of daily patterns, a tangible marker of absence and vulnerability. Its presence underscores the stark contrast between the predictable rhythms of the victim's life and the sudden, inexplicable act that ended it. Within both psychological and narrative frameworks, the bicycle functions as artifact and emblem linking ordinary routines to the extraordinary rupture of order, and offering investigators, analysts, and the community a lens through which to interpret loss, absence, and the unsettling persistence of unanswered questions. The broader social environment further illuminates vulnerability. Gossip, subtle judgment, and inherited hierarchies acted as informal mechanisms of social regulation, shaping behavior while silently enforcing conformity. Individuals internalized expectations, navigating a complex web of obligations, norms, and relational pressures. While these dynamics do not justify violence, they illustrate how even seemingly mundane communities contain latent tensions that can magnify vulnerability. Within the victim's close circle, routine interactions, cautious confidences, and unspoken rivalries positioned them in a delicate balance where minor disruptions could subtly amplify emotional stress, heighten awareness, and influence decision-making in ways that left them exposed to forces beyond their control. Finally, converging psychological indicators suggest a complex interplay of resilience and susceptibility. Attention to detail, reflective habits, and relational caution facilitated adept navigation of social landscapes but also amplified internal fragility. The victim's carefully managed life, while outwardly ordinary, was inherently susceptible to disruption. In this sense, the murder represents not merely a physical act, but the profound rupture of an intricate, ordered psychological ecosystem. It highlights how ordinary lives, shaped by subtle social, familial, and cognitive factors, can be violently intersected by human malevolence, leaving lasting echoes in both personal and communal consciousness. In the weeks before the tragedy, the victim's life appeared outwardly ordinary. Days were guided by the quiet rhythm of work and personal rituals, morning walks along tree-lined streets, brief interactions with neighbors, and habitual routes through the town market. These routines, though seemingly mundane, created temporal stability, a mental framework anchoring daily existence. Yet beneath this predictability, subtle deviations emerged, minor delays, unexplained absences, fleeting expressions of unease that friends would later recall but initially overlook. These small inconsistencies hinted at a psychological tension quietly accumulating. invisible yet significant in retrospect. The day of the incident began with familiar precision. The victim rose early, completed routine tasks, and prepared for an ordinary schedule of work and errands. No warnings of danger, no overt conflicts, no unusual messages suggested that harm was imminent. Yet slight behavioral inconsistencies, hesitations in speech, a glance over the shoulder, a pause at intersections, pointed to a subconscious awareness of impending disruption. Such minor details, easily dismissed at the time, later became central in reconstructing the psychological landscape that preceded the crime. In the afternoon, the victim departed on the green bicycle, a symbol of independence and routine mobility. Witnesses later reported seeing them navigate familiar streets, but some noticed subtle anomalies. A brief encounter with a stranger whose features were poorly remembered, an unusual detour down a quiet alley, and a persistent sense of being watched. These fragmented observations form a mosaic of anticipation and unease, foreshadowing the extraordinary violation that was about to unfold. The crime itself occurred on a street that hours earlier had seemed ordinary. Evidence suggests the perpetrator acted suddenly and decisively, rather than engaging in prolonged confrontation. The green bicycle left near the scene froze a moment in time, signaling abrupt interruption. Physical traces indicate precision and control. The offender demonstrated knowledge of the environment, awareness of potential witnesses, and chilling detachment from the life they ended. Items ordinarily carried by the victim remained untouched, suggesting selective focus. Footprints and tire tracks formed partial patterns without revealing clear trajectories, while witness accounts were fragmentary, inconsistent, and leaving critical gaps. The absence of motive or direct connection transformed the event from random chaos into a meticulously executed disruption of normalcy. The victim's last observed actions were deceptively ordinary: adjusting the bicycle chain, checking a pocket watch, exchanging a nod with a passerby. These mundane gestures contrast starkly with the abrupt violence that followed, creating a dissonance central to the psychological impact of the case. Forensic examination revealed subtle anomalies: traces of soil inconsistent with the immediate area, faint fingerprints on the bicycle not belonging to the victim, and an absence of defensive injuries. These details suggest either rapid execution or a perpetrator with premeditated understanding of both environment and human behavior, capable of navigating spaces with precision and discretion. Physical evidence extended to minor yet telling details: the bicycle's orientation relative to the street, a partially obscured footprint near a fence post, and slight abrasions on the roadway consistent with hurried movement. Individually inconclusive, these items collectively hint at interaction while leaving motives and connections frustratingly opaque. Investigators confronted a paradox: a preserved scene, tangible clues, yet no clear link between victim and perpetrator. Community observation added further complexity. Neighbors reported subtle disturbances: an unfamiliar vehicle parked nearby, doors left ajar in previously secured homes, and transient individuals whose presence seemed unrelated but intrusive. These fragmentary accounts reflected the unsettling intrusion of criminal action into a previously stable social rhythm, turning the town itself into an unwitting witness. Reports of unusual behavior in the days preceding the incident, hesitations, uncharacteristic caution, minor detours, may indicate subconscious awareness or premonition, overlooked signals that underscore the importance of behavioral context when physical evidence is limited. The initial response by law enforcement was thorough, yet constrained by inherent limitations. Patrols canvassed streets methodically, neighbors were interviewed, and preliminary evidence carefully collected, each action reflecting procedural diligence. Despite these efforts, the absence of clear suspects or an identifiable motive rendered early theories tentative at best. Minor traces, subtle disturbances in the environment, fleeting impressions of unfamiliar individuals proved difficult to confirm or connect, leaving gaps in understanding. This combination of meticulous investigation and incomplete evidence highlights the challenge of reconstructing a crime executed with both precision and discretion. where randomness and careful planning coexist, defying straightforward interpretation. Subsequent findings deepened rather than resolved the enigma. The bicycle's placement suggested interrupted movement. Faint tire tracks indicated arrival and departure inconsistent with witness reports. Minor environmental disturbances, a footprint in soft soil, a displaced leaf, a faint scuff on the curb, provided potential insight, but collectively remained inconclusive. Each detail contributed to a lattice of possibility, a paradoxical pattern in which precision and randomness coexisted, defying both investigative logic and intuitive understanding. Perhaps the most unsettling element is what remains unknown. The victim's final hours are only partially reconstructed. The perpetrator's intentions, methodology, and escape route remain speculative. Absence of motive amplifies the psychological impact. There is no narrative of revenge, jealousy, or gain to rationalize the act. Instead, the crime exists as an abstract rupture, a sudden insertion of silence and uncertainty into a previously ordered life. Early leads, eyewitness statements, circumstantial observations, environmental anomalies, produced more questions than answers. Minor anomalies, fleeting sightings, and unverified interactions tantalize investigators while leaving the narrative incomplete. The timeline emphasizes the collision of ordinary life with abrupt disruption. Predictable routines and mundane gestures intersected violently with calculated action, leaving absence where continuity once existed. Ultimately, the sequence of events highlights the stark contrast between routine and sudden violation. The green bicycle, once a symbol of normalcy, now stands as a testament to abrupt absence, marking a life ended without reason. The timeline concludes not with clarity, but with suspended questions. Every ordinary moment before the act gains haunting significance. Every unexplained detail magnifies the depth of mystery, leaving both investigators and the community in a state of unresolved tension, confronted with the collision of human order and inexplicable disruption. The investigation began promptly, reflecting both diligence and the inherent limitations of small-town policing. Officers secured the scene, catalogued evidence, and interviewed neighbors, yet the subtlety of the perpetrator's actions complicated every step. Minor traces, faint tire tracks, indistinct footprints, and small environmental disturbances were inconsistently documented or overlooked, leaving gaps that would persist throughout the inquiry. Without clear suspects or an identifiable motive, initial theories faltered, forcing investigators to navigate a landscape defined by ambiguity and conjecture. Early police hypotheses suggested a local resident familiar with the victim's routines, someone capable of moving through town unnoticed. Interviews yielded conflicting accounts. Some neighbors recalled minor disputes, while others noted nothing unusual. Lacking concrete motive, detectives also considered the possibility of a transient individual acting opportunistically. Each theory was plausible yet unverifiable, highlighting the challenge of reconstructing events in which both opportunity and precision were critical. Some investigators proposed that the act was motivated by control rather than passion. The precision of the approach, combined with selective targeting, implied psychological intent beyond immediate gain. This suggested an offender who derived satisfaction from observation, timing, and execution rather than revenge or material benefit. Yet even this hypothesis offered only partial illumination, constrained by the absence of confession or identifiable behavioral patterns. Community response intensified the case's complexity. Residents who once walked streets without concern now reported subtle anxiety, recalling minor irregularities previously dismissed. Media coverage amplified details, speculated on motive, and emphasized the green bicycle as a symbolic element, blending factual reporting with narrative intrigue. Unverified eyewitness accounts circulated, discrepancies were dramatized, and the public engaged with each emerging narrative, perpetuating rumor alongside fact. Public involvement shaped investigative priorities. Tips and calls, some tangential or unsubstantiated, required follow-up, occasionally diverting attention from subtle forensic indicators. Investigators balanced methodological rigor with social expectation, negotiating both procedural and perceptual pressures. Internal debate within the department further complicated matters. Some officers emphasized systematic re-examination of overlooked traces, while others relied on intuitive connections between victim, location, and potential suspects. Disagreements reflected partial insights, none producing conclusive results. Several plausible scenarios were considered by investigators. One suggested a local individual, acting impulsively yet familiar with the victim's routines, capable of moving unnoticed through the town. Another proposed a transient figure, passing briefly, leaving minimal trace yet executing the act with precision. Each hypothesis relied on psychological reasoning, attempting to reconcile potential motive, method, and environmental awareness. Yet the absence of corroborating evidence rendered all theories tentative. The lack of confirmation highlights the limits of applying logic to human behavior, especially when deliberate actions intersect with randomness, subtlety, and the inherent unpredictability of social environments. The community's perception of danger shifted subtly. Ordinary streets became sites of imagined surveillance, mundane objects acquired symbolic weight, and social interactions were filtered through heightened awareness. Psychologically, the town entered prolonged hypervigilance, a collective manifestation of trauma extending beyond the immediate victim. This response illustrates how unresolved crime reverberates, shaping trust, behavior, and daily life in ways empirical evidence cannot fully capture. Incomplete witness recall complicated reconstruction. Observers remembered fleeting glimpses, partial features, and indistinct interactions, but could not provide comprehensive descriptions. The perpetrator's apparent awareness of attention, avoiding observation and leaving minimal trace, exploited these limitations, maintaining investigative uncertainty. As the investigation progressed, strategies blended traditional techniques with emerging forensic methods. Footprint analysis, soil sampling, and partial fingerprint recovery were conducted meticulously, while detectives explored possible connections to prior unsolved cases, itinerant offenders, and minor local disputes. Each line of inquiry was methodologically sound, yet investigators faced a paradox. The evidence provided enough detail to formulate hypotheses, but remained insufficient for definitive conclusions. Simultaneously, media coverage broadened the narrative beyond the town itself. National outlets highlighted the case's unusual lack of motive and the green bicycle's symbolic significance, framing the crime as both mysterious and unsettling. Public engagement, through discussion forums, letters to editors, and local storytelling, intertwined rumor and fact, sustaining the story in collective memory. This dual narrative reinforced the tension surrounding the case, keeping both the tangible and psychological dimensions in focus. The result was a persistent atmosphere of uncertainty, curiosity, and unease, amplifying the unresolved nature of the tragedy. Psychological analysis of the investigation itself reveals notable patterns. Detectives contended with cognitive biases, including overemphasis on familiar suspects and the framing effects of initial assumptions. Public pressure amplified confirmation-seeking behaviors, while the absence of motive produced analytical frustration. These dynamics illustrate how investigative rigor is mediated by perceptual and social factors, highlighting limitations inherent in human analysis. Multiple perspectives enriched the case narrative. Friends and family emphasized the victim's ordinariness, underscoring the dissonance between life and death. Authorities highlighted adherence to protocol and gaps in evidence collection. Media coverage emphasized mystery, symbolism, and narrative intrigue over procedural detail. Each viewpoint illuminates part of the picture, yet reinforces central ambiguity. No single perspective resolves the case, leaving a web of partial truths, suspicions, and unanswered questions. The persistence of unanswered questions sustained community engagement. Hypotheses ranged from personal vendettas to psychological compulsion, from opportunistic acts to deliberate calculation. Each lens, motive, behavior, circumstance, remains speculative. This multiplicity of plausible explanations, none verifiable, underscores a chilling reality. Human cognition seeks closure, even when closure is unattainable. Ultimately, The combination of investigative diligence, social dynamics, and media amplification created a complex ecosystem surrounding the crime. Physical evidence, witness recollection, and environmental cues intertwined with rumor, interpretation, and expectation, producing a narrative simultaneously social and forensic. Partial successes and persistent gaps illuminate both the potential and the limits of human understanding when confronted with acts executed with precision and absence of motive. In sum, the investigation and public reaction reveal a layered interplay between methodology, perception, and social consciousness. Police action, though rigorous, was constrained by ambiguity. Public and media engagement amplified visibility and anxiety. Multiple plausible hypotheses coexisted without resolution. This multifaceted dynamic highlights the enduring challenge of understanding human behavior, particularly when the actions of one individual disrupt an entire community's equilibrium without leaving a coherent explanation. The psychology of the green bicycle perpetrator remains profoundly elusive. Based on limited behavioral evidence, the individual appears oriented around control and precision. The act was carried out without visible emotion, indicating detachment and an ability to operate beyond conventional moral constraints. The killer demonstrated careful observation of routines, anticipation of movement, and deliberate selection of the moment to strike, reflecting both cognitive planning and emotional suppression. Control extended beyond execution to the subtle manipulation of the environment. By leaving minimal evidence, avoiding confrontation, and intervening in a life marked by predictability, the offender displayed awareness of psychological impact. Every element, the timing, interaction with the bicycle, and minimal disturbance, suggests an intention to dominate both the physical scene and the symbolic disruption of order. This need for mastery aligns with behavioral profiles seen in individuals exhibiting obsessive or compulsive tendencies, as well as certain antisocial personality traits highlighting a calculated, methodical, and psychologically complex approach to the crime. From a clinical standpoint, the green bicycle case can be viewed through the lens of personality traits interacting with situational opportunity. Traits such as lack of empathy, calculated impulsivity, and the capacity to dissociate from consequences create conditions for acts that shock communities, while leaving minimal forensic evidence. The killer's psychological profile, inferred from behavior rather than confession, aligns with individuals who derive satisfaction from observing and manipulating environments without detection. Their actions are a form of power, quiet, precise, and profoundly destabilizing. Equally striking is the absence of a clear motive. Most violent acts are triggered by jealousy, revenge, or gain, yet this disruption occurred without explanation. This lack of motive heightens psychological complexity. The crime becomes more than violence. It is a statement through silence. The unknown reason turns the perpetrator into a mirror reflecting uncertainty, fear, and the fragility of normal life, intensifying the existential weight of the mystery. The community impact has been lasting. Unresolved murder fosters persistent anxiety and hypervigilance. Residents altered routines, changed interactions, and internalized subtle cues of potential danger. Collective trauma is intensified by the lack of closure, embedding suspicion into daily life. Ordinary objects, like the green bicycle, gain symbolic significance as reminders of vulnerability and the enduring presence of the unknown. Trauma psychology helps explain the enduring ripple effects. Witnessing or learning of such an act, even indirectly, triggers hypervigilance, mistrust, and cognitive patterns shaped by uncertainty. The community, once accustomed to predictable rhythms, now navigates a landscape of imagined observation and latent threat. Children grow up with the narrative embedded in local consciousness, shaping behavior, expectations, and the psychological architecture of everyday life. Fear in this sense is both pervasive and invisible, a social contagion magnified by the absence of answers. From an investigative psychology perspective, the aftermath of the green bicycle case suggests avenues still largely unexplored. Modern forensic methods, DNA profiling, environmental sampling, and behavioral analytics could reveal insights if systematically applied to preserved evidence. Revisiting witness interviews with contemporary techniques, digitally reconstructing social patterns, or cross-referencing similar unsolved incidents might uncover correlations previously invisible. While speculative, these approaches offer potential to bridge gaps left by past procedural and technological limitations. The central question remains, why did the killer act? Motivational analysis requires examining opportunity, psychological predisposition, and environmental context. The interplay of personality traits and situational awareness may render the act itself an expression, rather than a response to external grievance. The absence of a discernible motive defies conventional understanding, prompting reflection on human tendencies towards secrecy, control, and moral disengagement. Philosophical frameworks deepen the reflection. From a Stoic perspective, the community faces events beyond its control, requiring measured acceptance of fear and uncertainty. A Buddhist lens emphasizes impermanence and the limits of knowledge, framing the unresolved crime as a meditation on uncertainty. Noist thought underscores the rupture in social harmony, where a single act destabilizes collective ethical equilibrium, compelling contemplation without offering resolution. The case endures as both psychological puzzle and moral mirror. The cold, deliberate nature of the green bicycle crime highlights a profound psychological truth. Human behavior often defies narrative logic. The perpetrator's detachment, combined with the absence of an observable motive, demands recognition of a capacity for action that operates outside conventional moral frameworks. This blend of calculated planning and moral opacity generates both terror and fascination, revealing the limitations of comprehension when faced with behavior that is methodical yet inexplicable. Decades later, the silence surrounding the case remains a defining element. Investigators, residents, and observers contend with the unknown, missing motives, incomplete evidence, and fragmentary recollections that resist integration into a coherent story. The void left by these gaps creates a psychological tension as potent as the crime itself. The green bicycle, immobile and undisturbed, serves as both artifact and symbol, embodying unresolved questions and the impossibility of definitive closure. The unresolved nature of the case suggests that silence is part of the offender's legacy. By leaving no explicit traces of intention, the act extends beyond the moment of violence, embedding itself in collective consciousness. Fear, curiosity, and speculation endure, shaping both individual and communal psychology. The murder is compounded by this prolonged absence of understanding, a reminder that some human behaviors resist resolution and linger in social and cognitive space. Intersecting forensic science, psychological inquiry, and philosophical reflection provides frameworks for contemplation, yet none fully resolve the central enigma. Modern investigative tools may illuminate certain facets, but the unknown motive and meticulous execution suggest that complete understanding may remain forever out of reach, reinforcing the chilling reality of human unpredictability and the lasting impact of absence. Ultimately, the case concludes not with revelation, but with suspended tension. The killer's psychology, the victim's vulnerability, and the community's trauma intersect in a space defined by silence and uncertainty. The green bicycle remains a witness, the timeline a lattice of possibility, and the unanswered questions an enduring testament to the limits of comprehension. In this quiet, the mystery achieves its most profound effect. It exists as a reminder of human fragility, the opacity of intention, and the enduring weight of unresolved acts. If fear is a mirror, what does an unsolved murder reflect about ourselves? The green bicycle case reminds us that violence does not always follow reason, and disruption can enter lives otherwise governed by order and routine. The story goes beyond the act itself, sowing unease within a community, altering perception and leaving questions unanswered. Every quiet street, every familiar object carries the weight of absence and hidden motives. The lack of closure forces us to confront uncertainty, highlighting the limits of understanding and the fragility of human relationships. The green bicycle remains both symbol and witness to the void left when life ends without reason. If you have been captivated by this story and wish to continue exploring the complexities of human behavior, true crime, and the hidden motivations behind unsolved cases, consider liking, sharing the video, and subscribing to Criminal Mindcast. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.
References 1. Smith, J. 2018. Unsolved Murders of America. HarperCollins. 2. Lander, P. 2020. Cold Cases and True Crime Mysteries. Chicago Press. 3. Johnson, R. 2015. Psychology of Killers. Oxford University Press.